With the release of the Book of Boba Fett Episode 5, we were given a very rich history of the Mandalorian people, as well as what happened in the time between Star Wars Rebels Season 4 and Mando Season 2. We now finally know not only what happened on the Night of a Thousand Tears, but also why Bo Katan lost the Darksaber. In a way, she was doomed to fail from the start. So let's break down why Bo Katan lost the Darksaber and how she might try to take it back from Din Djarin. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe for more awesome Star Wars lore content just like this. After returning to the newly relocated Mandalorian covert on the Ringworld of Glavis, Mando was confronted by the armor about the weapon he now holds. He is given a deep lesson on what the Darksaber represents and how it can grant someone rulership of Mandalore. But not always. The armorer tells Mando that if the Darksaber is won by Creed in a traditional Mandalorian battle, then the winner can rule Mandalore and be united under the holder. If however it is not won in combat and simply falls into the hands of someone undeserving, something much worse would take place. She then tells him of an ancient prophecy that says if the Darksaber is merely handed away to someone, it will become a curse unto the nation. Mandalore will then be laid to waste and its people scattered to the four winds. Now tragically, this is exactly the situation that has taken place by the time of the Empire's fall. Mandalore was completely shattered, with its entire surface being bombarded by Moff Gideon's forces and Sundari, the capital itself, wiped out. The only ones who survived were the descendants of the extremist Mandalorian group called Death Watch, as they were exiled and forced to live on Mandalore's moon Concordia. These descendants of Death Watch soon became known as the Children of the Watch and were forced to flee from Mandalorian space, scattering across the galaxy just as the prophecy predicted. Now of course, other Mandalorians did survive, but the armorer believes that because they were exiled on Concordia during the Purge, that is the reason they survived. And that was definitely part of it, but other Mandalorians certainly did survive, like Bo Katan, and probably way more that we just haven't seen yet. The event which sparked this prophecy into motion in the first place stems all the way back to the Imperial era and the events of Star Wars Rebels. During that series, Ezra Bridger and Sabine Wren travelled to Dathomir, which was the homeworld of the holder of the Darksaber at the time, Darth Maul. Once there, they came across the ancient Mandalorian blade in his lair. Because Maul pretty much lost interest in ruling Mandalore after Order 66 and his capture, Ezra and Sabine were able to take it without a fight. Sabine then became the holder of the Darksaber, coming as a shock to the Mandalorian people. This was the first cog which set the prophecy into motion, but wasn't enough to trigger it to its full extent. The next domino to fall came when Sabine Wren fought in the Mandalorian Civil War on Mandalore, where a certain clan of Mandalorians aligned themselves with the Empire and were given dominion over the planet. This group was led by a man named Gar Saxon and later his brother Tiber Saxon, and they utilized a horrific Mandalorian superweapon known as the Arc Pulse Generator, which could melt Mandalorians alive inside of their Beskar armor. As you can imagine, this was one of the worst weapons ever created for the Mandalorian people, and still probably causes trauma to this day. The weapon itself was developed by Sabine Wren during her time at the Imperial Academy, so her fighting in this civil war was a pretty painful reminder of her past. Despite this, she managed to destroy the superweapon she created with the help of Bo Katan Kryze. Because she didn't believe she was ready to lead the Mandalorian people, Sabine Wren handed the weapon over to Bo Katan, who she saw as the rightful ruler, as the sister of Duchess Satine Kryze, who was the pacifist ruler before Darth Maul stormed in. This is exactly what the armorer was referencing when she said Bo Katan claimed rulership of Mandalore based on the Darksaber and blood alone. She didn't win it in a traditional Mandalorian battle. Either way, this is when things went horrifically wrong for the Mandalorian people. Sabine Wren then gifted the Darksaber to Bo Katan, and the clans of Mandalore bowed before her, despite not having won it in combat. This was an absolutely huge deal for the people of Mandalore, as they were finally united once more, putting an end to the most recent of the Mandalorian civil wars. Finally, the Mandalorians could look to the future with optimism and hope. Unfortunately though, that didn't last long. Now this is where things get spooky. The ancient Mandalorian prophecy which foretold the fall of Mandalore should a non-worthy holder gain control of the Darksaber came true. Mandalore was glassed and the planet devoured of all life, simply because Bo Katan accepted the Darksaber as a gift and did not earn it in combat. A decision which we now know she would not make a second time later down the track when Mando offers her the same thing. We don't fully know whether this prophecy is one just held by the extremist Mandalorians and the ones who follow the way, or if it is a long-standing prophecy among all Mandalorians. But whichever one it is, it doesn't really matter, as the prophecy 100% came true, and Bo Katan brought pain and destruction upon the Mandalorian people, whether she knew it or not. And this is where things get much deeper. I believe this prophecy is almost certainly related to the Force and was enacted by the Force itself. Even though the Mandalorians are deeply opposed to the use of the Force and the Jedi Order, that doesn't matter. The Force still surrounds and binds everything, including themselves. So just like the Force enacted the Chosen One prophecy to bring the light and the dark back to balance through Anakin Skywalker, the same might have taken place here. The Force may be working to bring the Mandalorian people back into balance between their pacifist ways and their more traditional warrior ways. It's no coincidence that the very thing prophesied for hundreds or even thousands of years came true, especially when not one, but two technically unworthy holders took control of the Darksaber. Now Sabine is a more complex case, considering she originally just collected the Darksaber out of Darth Maul's lair on Dathomir. Usually this would be considered an unworthy claim to the Darksaber, but she ended up beating Gar Saxon in combat on her homeworld of Cronest, technically earning the right to the blade. If the Force truly was at work here, this victory against Gar Saxon may have been enough to calm its furious storm and keep the balance. When, however, she took it a step further and gifted the Darksaber to Bo Katan, the Force may have intervened to ensure that the balance remained in the galaxy. This is exactly what has happened many times throughout galactic history, including with Anakin Skywalker. There is also the possibility that this prophecy is a complete fraud and only believed in by the extreme and radical Children of the Watch. We know this group has an irrational hatred of Bo Katan and her followers, so maybe this prophecy was developed as a direct reaction to her poor leadership of Mandalore. It's possible that this isn't even a prophecy at all and that the armorer simply developed it after Bo Katan allowed the planet to be glassed. Maybe she did it to scar the name Bo Katan for those who follow her. That's a very petty thing to do, but it sounds like something the armorer would have no problem with. We already know that Bo Katan and the armorer come from the same Mandalorian group lineage, being Death Watch, and maybe there was a massive split between them. The Children of the Watch was obviously created from the descendants of the Death Watch, and maybe they've taken things a step too far for even Bo Katan, who was a member of the original. Personally, I think that when the Great Schism happened between those who chose to follow Maul after he won the Darksaber and those who would never follow an outsider happened, the Maul followers were exiled to Concordia. We obviously know that Bo Katan's side of the schism came out on top at the Siege of Mandalore, so it's possible that the remaining Maul loyalists were exiled to the moon of Concordia, just like the armorer was. I think the armorer may actually even be Rook Kast herself, who was the third in command to Darth Maul and a prominent follower of his rule. She also has the spikes on her helmet denoting her allegiance as a Maul loyalist, so maybe she was the biggest loyalist of them all. After being exiled to Concordia following her defeat at the Siege of Mandalore, it's possible that she was forced to form a new offshoot of Death Watch called the Children of the Watch to honour her roots from Pre-Vizsla's Death Watch rather than Bo Katan. And this right here could be the true reason behind her hatred of Bo Katan, the Great Schism. If you want to know more about this theory and all of the very compelling evidence for it, make sure you check out the pinned comment below to see my full video on it. It's one of my favourite Mandalorian theories, so I really hope it pans out. Now for the next episode of the series, I think we'll get an actual appearance from Bo Katan Kryze herself. We will most likely see Bo's point of view and how she actually lost the Darksaber, which from what we know so far appears to be at the hands of Moff Gideon. It's not really clear if he won it in combat from Bo or if he obtained it through more nefarious means, but that's a question we'll definitely have answered very soon. So for my final point on why Bo Katan really lost the Darksaber, well, she simply wasn't right to rule Mandalore. Bo Katan failed her people multiple times on the day Maul took over, to losing her reign to Gar Saxon after the Siege of Mandalore, to now allowing her people to be wiped out at the Night of 1,000 Tears. Of course, most of these events weren't directly her fault, but with Bo being the leader of Mandalore, the responsibility and blame really has to fall with her. It was her job to unite and rally the Mandalorian people behind her to defend their creed, but she failed multiple times. Either way, I have hope that she can still be redeemed and possibly come to an agreement with Din Djarin. I would love to see her atone for her mistakes, as she's definitely a great character, but I doubt she will ever get the Darksaber back from Mando. At this point, Mando seems like the destined ruler and the one who pulled the sword out of the stone. Bo Katan's many opportunities by this point have probably passed. So that is the real reason why Bo Katan lost the Darksaber. Whether it was willed by the Force or by simple fate, she was unfortunately destined to fail from the moment she took the saber from Sabine Wren. Thanks so much for watching, really hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers guys, hope to see you in the next one.